One day you may wake up and realize you became someone you never meant to be. Not a bad person, not a failure, just someone who kept saying, "Not yet," until "not yet" quietly became a life. There was something you wanted once, a place you wanted to go, something you wanted to create, a risk you wanted to take, a person you wanted to become. And maybe you can still feel that person somewhere beneath everything you've built. But life became practical. You learned what people expected from you. You learned which choices earned approval, which dreams sounded unrealistic, which parts of yourself were easier to hide. So you adapted. And the terrifying part is that you can become incredibly successful at living the wrong life. You can have the job, the relationship, the routine, the approval. You can do everything you were supposed to do and still lie awake wondering, is this really it? Because somewhere beneath the person you've become is the person you might have been. And the distance between those two people grows every time you tell yourself you'll change someday. But someday is dangerous. Someday makes you feel like you still have unlimited time. You don't. There will eventually be a last year, a last summer, a last ordinary morning. And one day, there will be something you've been assuming your entire life. Another tomorrow. That isn't meant to frighten you. It's meant to wake something up. Because there is a question most people avoid until far too much of their life has already passed. If nobody were watching, if nobody could judge you, if nobody could be disappointed by what you chose, would you still choose the life you're living now? Don't answer too quickly. Because before this is over, you're going to understand why that question is much harder than it sounds. Most people don't consciously choose who they become. They inherit a version of themselves and then spend years defending it as if it were their own. But somewhere underneath everything you've learned to be, there may still be a life waiting for you. And the most dangerous thing you can believe is that you have plenty of time to begin it. Long before you could decide what mattered to you, the world began teaching you what should matter. Approval became a compass. Praise showed you which qualities were welcome. Disappointment revealed which ones carried a cost. You noticed what made your parents proud, what earned acceptance from friends, what attracted admiration, what caused tension. No one needed to hand you instructions. You were paying attention, so you adjusted. Perhaps you became agreeable because conflict threatened connection, successful because achievement brought recognition, independent because needing anyone felt dangerous, quiet because honesty created problems. These adaptations weren't weaknesses. Many were intelligent responses to the environment that shaped you. The trouble begins when a strategy becomes an identity. Eventually, you stop saying, "This is how I learned to survive," and begin saying, "This is simply who I am." That distinction changes everything. Because once an identity feels permanent, you defend it, even when it makes you miserable. You reject opportunities that don't match your established character. You dismiss desires that seem inconsistent with the person everyone knows. You remain loyal to decisions made by a younger version of yourself who possessed far less freedom than you have now. And gradually, familiarity begins masquerading as truth. This is why changing your life requires more than changing your circumstances. You can move somewhere new and bring the same fears, find another relationship and recreate familiar patterns, earn more money and preserve the same insecurity. Build new habits while protecting an old identity underneath them. The scenery changes, the character remains. But there is a question capable of disturbing that entire structure. How much of what you call your personality is actually a collection of adaptations you practiced until they became automatic? Because if some parts of you were learned, they are not necessarily permanent. And discovering what exists beneath them requires looking somewhere most people spend their entire lives avoiding. What you avoid does not always disappear. Sometimes it waits. A desire can remain buried for years, resurfacing as irritation, fascination, restlessness, or an inexplicable sadness when you see someone doing what you once wanted for yourself. This is where envy becomes interesting. We usually treat envy as something shameful, a flaw to suppress. But occasionally, it contains information. The person who unsettles you may possess a freedom you've denied yourself. Their confidence may expose your habit of shrinking. Their creativity may remind you of something you stopped making. Their willingness to leave may confront all the places you've remained from fear. What hurts isn't always what they have. Sometimes it's what their life reveals about yours. Carl Jung understood that the qualities we reject do not simply vanish. They can retreat beyond conscious awareness, influencing us indirectly through emotion, judgment, attraction, and resistance. This is part of what he called the shadow. And the shadow isn't composed only of darkness. It can contain courage you were punished for showing, ambition you learned to hide, sensitivity that made you vulnerable, playfulness that adulthood taught you to dismiss, a voice you softened until nobody could hear it, including you. This creates a strange possibility. Some of the people you judge most harshly may be expressing qualities you've forbidden within yourself. Also, some of the lives you cannot stop thinking about may represent paths you never allowed yourself to explore. Pay attention to what repeatedly captures you. Not every desire deserves pursuit. Not every impulse contains wisdom. But persistent fascination deserves investigation. Because buried beneath certain reactions is a question far more useful than envy itself. What does this person permit themselves to do that I have never permitted myself to become? The answer can be uncomfortable. It can also reveal the first coordinates back toward yourself. And yet, recognizing what you've buried is only the beginning, because there is a powerful reason you abandoned those parts in the first place. Bringing them back may threaten something the human mind values even more than happiness. Belonging has a price. For much of human history, separation from the group wasn't merely uncomfortable, it could be dangerous. We carry remnants of that ancient dependence into modern life, which helps explain why rejection can feel disproportionately painful. Your circumstances may be safe, yet disapproval can still register like a threat. So, when becoming more authentic risks changing how others see you, an invisible conflict begins. Part of you wants freedom, another part wants belonging. This is why transformation often feels frightening, precisely when it matters most. Changing careers might disappoint your family. Setting boundaries could upset someone accustomed to your compliance. Taking your ambitions seriously may expose you to ridicule. Speaking honestly can alter relationships built around your silence. The cost of becoming yourself is sometimes discovering who preferred the version of you that required less from them. That realization can keep a person trapped for decades. It is easier to remain predictable. Predictability preserves roles. Roles preserve relationships. Relationships preserve the feeling of safety. So you keep performing, the dependable one, the successful one, the easygoing one, the strong one, the person who never causes trouble. Eventually, others stop seeing the performance. More dangerously, so do you. This is why genuine change can create guilt. You aren't necessarily doing something wrong. You may simply be violating an old agreement you never consciously made. I will remain who you expect me to be, so I never have to risk losing your acceptance. But every agreement has a cost, and this one is paid with pieces of a life. A conversation never had, a boundary never drawn, a talent never developed. A departure endlessly postponed. A dream made smaller until it finally stopped frightening anyone. There comes a point when preserving everyone's image of you becomes more painful than disappointing them. And when that moment arrives, another question appears. How much of your future are you willing to sacrifice to remain recognizable to people who only know your past? Because eventually, becoming yourself requires allowing someone else to misunderstand you. There is another reason people remain where they are. The familiar can feel safer than the fulfilling. You can dislike your circumstances and still become deeply attached to their predictability. You know how this version of life works. You understand its disappointments. You know which problems arrive, how much they hurt, and what is expected of you. The unknown offers no such guarantee, so the mind performs a subtle trick. It transforms uncertainty into danger. Suddenly, the dream needs more planning. The decision requires additional certainty. The opportunity arrives at the wrong moment. You need another month, another year, another sign. Preparation becomes sophisticated procrastination. And because waiting feels responsible, fear can disguise itself as patience. This is how years disappear without appearing wasted. Nothing dramatic happens. You simply continue. The same alarm, the same route, the same conversations, the same private promises made after difficult days. Then enough repetition accumulates that the temporary begins looking permanent. This is why regret rarely announces itself at the beginning. At first, there is always time. Time to start, time to leave, time to apologize, time to create, time to become. But possibility has an expiration date. Not because every dream becomes impossible with age, but because every choice closes certain doors while opening others. A life is shaped as much by what remains unchosen as by what is pursued. That is what makes postponement deceptive. Refusing to choose is still a choice. Remaining where you are still carries you somewhere. And the future does not wait for certainty before arriving. Perhaps courage, then, is not the moment fear disappears. Perhaps it is the moment you understand that staying still has consequences too. Because there are two risks in front of you. The risk of discovering what happens if you change, and the risk of someday discovering what would have happened if you had. Only one of them gives you an answer. Every unlived possibility leaves a trace. It appears during quiet drives, unexpected memories, birthdays, reunions, departures. A photograph can awaken it. So can hearing an old song or passing the street where an earlier dream once felt possible. For a moment, the distance between who you imagined becoming and where you actually arrived becomes visible. Most people quickly look away. They reach for distraction, productivity, entertainment, anything capable of covering the discomfort. Yet discomfort occasionally carries intelligence. Viktor Frankl spent much of his work exploring humanity's need for meaning. His central insight was not that existence must always feel pleasant. Rather, human beings can endure extraordinary difficulty when they perceive significance within what they are moving toward. That changes the question. Instead of asking whether your days are comfortable, ask whether they are meaningful. Comfort can keep you occupied for decades. Meaning asks something harder. It demands participation, responsibility, commitment, a willingness to invest your finite attention in something worthy of its cost. This explains why achievement alone can feel strangely hollow. You can acquire everything your younger self associated with success, and discover that possession cannot answer a question of purpose. The promotion arrives, the number increases. People congratulate you. Then, ordinary morning returns. Because accomplishment answers, did I reach it? Meaning asks, was it worth reaching? Those are profoundly different questions. Perhaps the emptiness people sometimes experience after getting what they wanted isn't evidence that nothing matters. It may be evidence that they were pursuing a destination borrowed from somebody else's map. That possibility deserves attention. You do not need to destroy your existing world to investigate it. Begin smaller. Notice what makes hours disappear. Notice which responsibilities leave you tired but satisfied. Notice what you would continue learning even without recognition. Mortality has a strange way of correcting priorities. Things that once seemed enormous become embarrassingly small when viewed against a limited existence. The argument you replayed for weeks. The stranger whose opinion controlled your confidence. The embarrassment that prevented you from trying. The perfect moment you insisted on waiting for. From far enough away, much of it loses its authority. This is why awareness of death does not have to make existence darker. It can make existence clearer. The Stoics practiced memento mori, not as an obsession with dying, but as a reminder that attention is expensive because its supply is finite. You are spending yours right now. Every yes purchases something with a piece of your existence. Every no does the same. Every hour invested somewhere becomes unavailable everywhere else. Seen this way, time is not merely passing around you. You are exchanging it for work, for relationships, for entertainment, for resentment, for creation, for hesitation. The question is not whether these exchanges occur. The question is whether you would knowingly make them. Because much of existence is spent unconsciously, as though the supply will somehow replenish itself. Weeks become seasons, seasons become years. Then, a date that once sounded impossibly distant appears on the calendar. Still, urgency should not become panic. Panic wastes the very resource it fears losing. The purpose of remembering life's limits is not to sprint through every experience. It is to become selective. To stop giving entire pieces of yourself to things that deserve minutes. To recognize which ambitions are genuinely yours. To understand which relationships require presence while they are still here. To make the call. Begin the work. Say what matters. Leave what has already ended. Protect what remains alive. There is tremendous freedom in accepting that you cannot experience every possible existence. You only need to stop accidentally missing your own. And once you understand that, the question changes. Instead of asking how much time remains, you begin asking something far more useful. What deserves the time that remains? Change creates an uncomfortable interval. The former identity no longer fits, yet the emerging one does not feel natural. This middle ground can resemble confusion. Old routines lose their appeal. Familiar conversations feel different. Goals that once provided direction become strangely empty. Meanwhile, whatever comes next remains uncertain. Many people interpret this discomfort as evidence that they made a mistake. So they retreat. They return to familiar habits, familiar roles, familiar relationships, not necessarily because those things are right, but because recognition feels safer than ambiguity. Kierkegaard understood anxiety as deeply connected to possibility. Freedom sounds beautiful until you recognize what it requires. If multiple paths are available, then choosing one means accepting responsibility for the direction taken. Certainty can no longer carry the burden for you. Neither can fate. This is where genuine freedom becomes heavier than fantasy. A dream, imagined from a distance, asks nothing. A decision does. Once you begin moving toward what matters, excuses lose their protective function. You become visible. Your abilities can be tested. Your assumptions can fail. Others may disagree. Reality may refuse the picture you created in your head. But uncertainty is not proof that you are moving incorrectly. Sometimes, it is simply what the absence of an old script feels like. There is no familiar character telling you exactly how to behave. No inherited map guaranteeing approval. No established routine deciding tomorrow before you arrive there. For perhaps the first time, you must participate consciously. That can feel terrifying. It can also be the beginning of ownership. You do not need certainty about the entire road. You need enough honesty to recognize the next decision that belongs to you. Eventually, a life that once seemed unfamiliar begins carrying your fingerprints. Not because fear disappeared, because fear stopped receiving the final vote. And perhaps that is what freedom actually feels like at first. Not confidence, but the willingness to move without permission. There is a quiet test for whether something truly belongs to you. Remove the audience. Imagine nobody could applaud the outcome. Nobody could envy it. Nobody would know how much you earned, where you lived, what title you carried, how impressive your choices appeared. Take away comparison. Take away recognition. Take away the possibility of proving anyone wrong. What remains desirable? That question can expose motivations hidden beneath ambition. Some goals survive immediately, others collapse. Perhaps the expensive symbol mattered because it communicated success. Perhaps the career mattered because it made your family proud. Perhaps the relationship mattered, partly because being alone felt like losing. Perhaps constant achievement became a way of earning worth rather than expressing ability. None of this makes those pursuits meaningless. It simply asks you to separate desire from performance. A goal can look identical from the outside, while being driven by entirely different forces within. One person builds because creating feels necessary. Another builds because stopping would force them to confront inadequacy. One stays from devotion, another stays from fear. One seeks recognition as a consequence of meaningful work. Another chooses the work primarily to obtain recognition. The behavior alone cannot reveal the difference. Only honesty can. This is why becoming yourself requires more than courage. It requires attention. You must become interested in your motives, without immediately judging them. Ask what remains when nobody is impressed. Ask what you miss when life becomes too busy. Ask what repeatedly returns after you've tried to dismiss it. Ask which choices create a private sense of alignment, even when they earn nothing externally. Those answers may not produce a dramatic revelation. They may point towards something surprisingly ordinary. A craft, a place, a conversation, a quieter existence, a difficult pursuit, a different way of spending your mornings. The authentic path does not always look extraordinary. It simply feels less divided. And perhaps that is the signal worth noticing. The moment you no longer need your life to look convincing, because, privately, it has begun to feel like yours. Eventually, reflection reaches a limit. There comes a point when another realization will not rescue you. You already know which conversation needs to happen, which habit is draining you, which possibility keeps returning, which excuse has become too familiar to remain convincing. The difficulty is no longer understanding. It is crossing the distance between recognition and action. That distance can appear enormous because the mind imagines transformation as a complete reconstruction of existence. Quit everything, move somewhere else. Become fearless. Start over. But meaningful change is usually less theatrical. A direction can shift through one honest decision. Send the application, write the first page, make the appointment, decline the invitation, take the class, tell someone the truth. Spend 1 hour building what you claim matters. Small actions seem insignificant because they do not immediately produce a new existence. Their power lies elsewhere. They create evidence. Every choice teaches you something about the person making it. When you repeatedly act against an outdated pattern, the old description becomes harder to maintain. "I never finish anything" weakens when work gets completed. "I couldn't do that" loses credibility after the first attempt. "I've always been this way" becomes questionable once behavior proves otherwise. Identity follows evidence more readily than intention. That is why promises made privately can feel powerful at midnight and disappear by morning. The feeling was real. The evidence remained unchanged. So do not demand a revolution from yourself. Demand proof. One action your previous identity would have avoided. Then allow tomorrow to contain another. Eventually, the direction becomes unmistakable. A different future does not suddenly arrive and transform you. You construct it through decisions small enough to make today and meaningful enough to alter who makes the next one. This is where possibility stops being fantasy. It acquires weight, shape, momentum, and the life that once existed only in imagination begins entering reality through the smallest opening available. What you choose next. There will be resistance, not always from other people, often from the voice inside you that sounds remarkably reasonable. It will remind you how many times you failed before. It will point toward unfinished attempts, embarrassing mistakes, abandoned plans, evidence collected across years. Then it will make a convincing argument. Why should this time be different? That question sounds logical, but hidden inside it is an assumption that your history deserves authority over your potential. The past can explain you without being allowed to govern you. A mistake is information. A failure is an event. An abandoned attempt is something that happened. None of these are identities until you turn them into conclusions. Yet human beings do this constantly. I failed becomes I'm a failure. I was rejected becomes I'm unwanted. I gave up becomes I never follow through. A temporary experience becomes a permanent definition. Then future choices are filtered through it. You avoid the challenge because you already know who you are. You refuse the opportunity because your biography has supposedly settled the question. You protect an identity created from evidence that may be years out of date. But your history has one limitation. It contains no record of what you do next. That territory remains unwritten. You are allowed to surprise the person you used to be. You are allowed to contradict an old conclusion. You are allowed to become difficult to explain using your previous patterns. The goal is not to erase what happened. It is to stop turning memory into prophecy. Your scars can remain, your lessons can remain, your consequences can remain, but the verdict does not have to. There is something profoundly liberating about realizing that the next decision does not require consistency with the last 1,000. It requires only enough courage to become new evidence. And once that evidence exists, the story you've been telling about yourself must begin making room for another possibility. At some point, you have to stop rehearsing the person you might become. There is comfort in imagining a future self, more disciplined, more courageous, more honest, finally doing the work, taking the risk, saying what matters. That figure can become so vivid that thinking about them almost feels like progress. But imagination has a hidden danger. It can give you the emotional reward of transformation without requiring its cost. You picture the finished result while remaining protected from the awkward beginning. No rejection, no uncertainty, no visible failure, no sacrifice. The future stays perfect because reality has never touched it. Then another year passes. The dream remains beautiful. You remain safely outside it. This is where potential becomes dangerous. Being capable of something is not the same as becoming it. Talent unused eventually becomes a story about what could have happened. An unwritten book receives no credit for existing inside someone's mind. A journey never taken leaves no memory except wondering. Possibility matters only while it can still become participation. So perhaps the future self you've been imagining does not need more visualization. Perhaps that person needs evidence that you are coming. Something tangible. Something inconvenient. A decision that costs enough to prove you mean it. Because there is a difference between wanting another existence and becoming capable of carrying one. The latter changes your calendar, your priorities, your boundaries, your behavior when nobody is watching. It asks something from the present instead of borrowing endlessly from tomorrow. Eventually, the distance between who you are and who you could become is measured less by knowledge than by action. And there is only one place action has ever been possible. Not someday, not when confidence arrives, not when circumstances become perfect. Here, while the door is still open. Perhaps the greatest mistake is believing you need to become extraordinary. You don't. A life can be deeply yours without being impressive from the outside. The world teaches us to measure progress visibly. More money, more recognition, more achievement, more proof that we mattered. But some of the most important changes leave almost nothing to display. You stop betraying your own boundaries. You become present with people you love. You make peace with an ambition that was never truly yours. You protect an hour for work that gives you meaning. You become comfortable saying no without constructing an elaborate defense. You finally allow yourself to enjoy something that produces no status at all. From the outside, very little may appear different. Inside, an enormous amount has changed. The distance between your values and your behavior begins shrinking. That distance matters because exhaustion does not always come from doing too much. Sometimes it comes from constantly acting against what you know. Saying yes while wanting no. Smiling while resentful. Pursuing what looks successful while secretly longing for something simpler. Maintaining an image that requires continuous effort to protect. A divided existence consumes energy. Alignment returns some of it. Not because every problem disappears, but because you are no longer fighting yourself at every turn. This is why the life meant for you may not require a dramatic escape. It may require a series of corrections, small enough to seem ordinary. Honest enough to change your direction. The goal was never to construct a perfect existence before time runs out. Perfection is another form of postponement. The goal is simpler. To reach the end without discovering that you spent your limited years faithfully performing a role you were always free to question. You still have choices available. That is the important part. And whatever comes next does not need to impress anyone. It only needs to become increasingly difficult to mistake for somebody else's life. There is no announcement when a chapter of your life becomes the last chance to do something. You rarely know which ordinary afternoon will be the final one spent with someone. which opportunity will never return in the same form, which healthy year you will later wish you had appreciated, which invitation was actually a doorway, which idea deserved more than another note saved for later. Life does not label these moments. That is what makes them easy to miss. We imagine important decisions arriving with certainty, accompanied by some unmistakable feeling that tells us the moment has come. Usually, nothing like that happens. Tuesday looks like Tuesday. The morning feels ordinary. Fear remains present. Responsibilities still exist. You simply reach a point where continuing to delay costs more than beginning imperfectly. This is why waiting to feel ready can consume an astonishing amount of existence. Readiness often follows movement. Clarity can emerge after commitment. Confidence is frequently built by surviving the very experiences uncertainty told you to avoid. You discover yourself through contact with reality, by attempting, failing, adjusting, returning, choosing again with better information. A meaningful path is rarely revealed in advance. It becomes visible beneath your feet. So perhaps you do not need another sign. Perhaps the fact that something worthy keeps returning to your attention is enough reason to examine it honestly, not recklessly, not impulsively, but seriously. There are dreams that should be released. Others keep knocking because they were never given a fair answer. Learn the difference. Then remember this: the tragedy is not that every possibility cannot be lived. No one receives enough years for that. The tragedy would be recognizing what mattered, knowing what prevented you, seeing the door remain open, and choosing indefinitely not to walk through it. Because eventually, every open door becomes a memory of one. There is a freedom that appears when you stop demanding guarantees. You may choose carefully and still be wrong. You may give everything to meaningful work and watch it fail. You may leave what is familiar only to discover that the next chapter is harder. You may speak honestly and lose someone. You may pursue a dream and eventually decide it was never yours. None of this makes the attempt wasted. A fully lived existence cannot be built around avoiding every painful outcome. That strategy creates its own kind of suffering, the slow frustration of remaining untouched by anything uncertain enough to change you. Safety can protect your comfort. It cannot promise fulfillment. The person who waits for certainty asks the future to reveal itself before taking a step. The future never agrees. It offers possibility instead. That is enough. You can make thoughtful decisions without knowing their endings. You can prepare without controlling every variable. You can move carefully without remaining motionless. Maturity is not the elimination of risk. It is learning which risks deserve you. Some are reckless. Others are the admission price for a life that feels awake. Loving someone deeply carries the possibility of loss. Creating something meaningful invites criticism. Choosing an unconventional path may bring doubt. Being seen risks rejection. Yet, avoiding vulnerability does not remove the cost. It simply changes what you pay. Instead of risking disappointment, you risk numbness. Instead of embarrassment, stagnation. Instead of temporary uncertainty, permanent wandering. There is no path without consequence, only different consequences. So the question becomes clear. Which pain would you rather carry? The discomfort of discovering what happens, or the weight of never knowing? One leaves experience, the other leaves imagination. And imagination can spend decades inventing endings reality was never given the chance to write. Eventually, the question becomes personal. Not what people should do, not what sounds wise, not what would make an inspiring story. What are you avoiding? There may already be an answer forming before you finish asking. Perhaps it is painfully specific. A name, a resignation letter, an unfinished project, a city, an apology, a boundary, a beginning. Whatever appeared, notice how quickly the mind tries to negotiate with it. Later, after things calm down. Once you're more prepared, when circumstances improve. These thoughts may contain legitimate concerns. Wisdom does not require recklessness, but fear becomes difficult to recognize when it learns to speak the language of responsibility. So, separate the practical obstacle from the emotional one. Ask what can genuinely be solved. Money can be saved. Skills can be learned. Plans can be revised. Conversations can be prepared. Timelines can be adjusted. Then observe what remains after the practical problems have answers. That remainder is revealing. Maybe the deepest obstacle is embarrassment, uncertainty, rejection. The possibility that you might try wholeheartedly and discover you are not exceptional. Or perhaps success itself frightens you, because achieving what you claim to want would require leaving a familiar identity behind. These are different fears. They deserve different answers, but none should remain unnamed. An unnamed fear controls decisions from the shadows. A recognized one becomes something you can examine. You do not have to conquer it. You only have to stop confusing its voice with truth. Fear can accompany the decision without making it. Doubt can sit beside you without choosing the direction. Uncertainty can remain unresolved while movement begins. That is enough, because courage was never a personality possessed by fortunate people. It is a relationship with discomfort. And every time you act while discomfort is present, you teach yourself something important. Fear may be allowed to speak. It does not have to be obeyed. Eventually, you stop needing a dramatic reinvention. You begin noticing smaller truths. What gives you energy? What drains it? Where you become performative? Where you feel strangely at ease? Which commitments strengthen you? Which ones require constant self-betrayal? These observations form a compass, not a perfect one, but perhaps perfection was never required. A direction is enough. The person you are trying to become will not appear all at once. That identity emerges through hundreds of ordinary moments when nobody is applauding. Getting up when the promise was private. Keeping the boundary after guilt arrives. Returning to the work after excitement disappears. Admitting you were wrong. Changing an opinion. Walking away from something that once defined you. Beginning again without turning the restart into evidence of failure. This is how character is forged. Quietly, repeatedly, without ceremony. Eventually, actions that once required enormous effort begin feeling natural. You look backward and realize the old pattern no longer has the same authority. Not because you defeated some permanent enemy, because you stopped feeding it. This is worth remembering whenever progress feels invisible. A tree does not become taller because you stare at it. Growth accumulates beneath perception. So does identity. The conversation you finally had matters. The hour you protected matters. The promise you kept matters. The decision nobody noticed matters. These moments are not preparation for your real life. They are your real life. Perhaps that is the realization capable of changing everything. You are not traveling towards some distant point where existence finally begins. There is no future version of you waiting at the finish line to take over. There is only this sequence of choices, each one quietly answering. Who are you becoming now? Treat that question carefully. Your answer is already taking shape. There may come a moment when you realize you cannot recover every year already spent. That realization can hurt. You cannot return to an earlier age, carrying everything you understand now. Certain roads have closed. Some relationships have changed beyond repair. Opportunities passed without announcing their departure. There is grief in accepting this. But regret becomes destructive only when yesterday is allowed to consume what remains. The years behind you are gone. The ones ahead are still capable of being shaped. That difference matters, because looking backward can become another form of postponement. You replay what should have happened, rewrite conversations that ended years ago, imagine decisions made with knowledge you did not possess at the time, then punish an earlier version of yourself for failing to understand lessons that required experience to learn. That is an impossible standard. You were making choices with the awareness available to you then. Now you possess more. Use it. But regret become instruction instead of identity. If losing years taught you that presence matters, become present. If silence cost you something, speak. If fear kept you small, recognize its pattern sooner. If chasing approval pulled you away from yourself, stop handing strangers authority over your direction. Nothing can make the past different, but the past can make the future different if you allow it to teach rather than imprison you. Perhaps growing older is not merely the closing of possibilities. It is also the sharpening of priorities. You begin recognizing what deserves less attention, what deserves more, what was never worth carrying, what should have been protected. That knowledge came at a price. Do not waste it by wishing you had purchased it sooner. Use what your life has taught you while there is still life available to use it. Because the most important question is no longer what you would change if you could return. It is what you will change now that you cannot. Maybe you have spent years believing that a different life requires a different version of you. More confident, more certain, more prepared. But perhaps you have the order reversed. You do not become ready and then begin. Beginning is what changes you. The difficult conversation creates the person capable of speaking honestly. The first attempt creates a person willing to be seen trying. The boundary creates the person who respects their own limits. The departure creates the person capable of walking forward. We often wait for identity to grant permission for action, but action is continually creating identity. This means something important. You do not need to solve your entire existence before morning. You do not need a perfect purpose. You do not need to know exactly where the next decade leads. You only need enough awareness to recognize where you have been betraying what matters. Then make one decision that no longer participates in that betrayal. It may be invisible to everyone else. That's fine. Some of the most important turning points in a human life happen without witnesses. No announcement, no applause, no dramatic transformation. Only a private moment when someone decides, I cannot keep abandoning this part of myself. From the outside, tomorrow may look almost identical. The same room, the same responsibilities, the same unfinished problems. But beneath the surface, direction has changed, and direction matters more than distance. A single degree seems insignificant at the beginning of a journey. Given enough time, it leads somewhere entirely different. Your next choice may feel equally small. Make it carefully. Because the future you keep imagining will not be created in one extraordinary moment. It will be assembled quietly from ordinary decisions, like the one waiting for you now. And perhaps becoming yourself was never about discovering a person hidden somewhere in the distance. Perhaps it was about finally refusing to keep walking away from the person who has been here all along. So when the world becomes quiet again, do not ask yourself whether you have enough time to become everything you once imagined. Ask something simpler. Am I moving toward a life I would recognize as my own? You do not need to repair every mistake. You do not need to recover every missed opportunity. You do not need to become extraordinary. You are still here, which means something remains unfinished. There are words you can still say, things you can still create, people you can still love more openly, places you can still see, decisions you can still make differently, parts of yourself you can stop hiding simply because they no longer fit the expectations surrounding you. Maybe that is enough. Not unlimited time, not certainty, not another perfect beginning, just another choice. Until the distance between the person you perform and the person you recognize begins to disappear. Someday, someone will experience an ordinary morning without knowing it will become one of their last. That is true for all of us. But you are not standing inside that unknown morning right now. You are here. And while you are here, your life is still capable of answering you. So let the years ahead contain fewer things you almost did, fewer words you nearly said, fewer dreams continually moved into tomorrow. Let them contain more evidence that you were actually present for the existence you were given. And if spending time here helps you think more deeply about your life, you can subscribe to Inner Forge and return whenever you need these ideas again. For now, nothing more needs to be solved. Let the noise settle. Let everything you've heard remain somewhere in the background. And when morning eventually arrives, remember, you do not need to become someone else. You only need to stop abandoning the person your life is still giving you time to become.